operate this, you know, you could think of it as a meditation center. That was what it was designed to be, are very in tune with the whole idea of psychedelics as a spiritual practice. So it's really, I feel very at home here, and I want to encourage everybody else to feel that way too. And you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I might I'll introduce everyone.
Yeah.
So my name is Susannah Cahalan. I am the author of The Acid Queen, which is not here, but that's okay. I also want to just call attention to a necklace I'm wearing that was actually given me tonight to wear by Gary Woodruff and Kate Woodruff, right here. And I just want to first just talk about Gary and Kate. Gary is Rosemary Woodruff Leary's brother. And the beginning of the book really starts with these two people. So I became interested in Rosemary, and I looked at her archives, the New York Public Library, and the people who had donated those archives were Kate and Gary. And I contacted them. It was during the height of the pandemic, and we spoke on the phone many times. But those initial times was a kind of getting to know you situation, and I immediately fell in love with the Woodruff family. Not only Rosemary, who I'm in love with, but also Gary and Kate, and they have been incredible. For the past 4 years, I worked on the book, and they were just a joy to work with. They trusted me. They gave me access to archives nobody saw. They really did entrust me with telling Rosemary's story, and I really hope that I did you proud with it. It really means a lot to me. So we actually today we ran over the Golden Gate Bridge together.
Yay.
As a kind of, we're going to do a culminating event of these 4 years, and we went in the water. We swam in the water in the bay today.
Perfect.
So it's been a big day, and it's been wonderful.
Hardcore.
It all comes from him. He's a big, big triathlete. So I told myself, okay, I'm going to do this. Gary, what would Gary do? He would get in the water. So, and what would Rosemary do? She would get in the water. So I did. So that's where the book starts. And from there, I met John and Denis. And John was key to putting this book together. I could not have done it without him and his perspective. John was with Rosemary during a very dark and mysterious time of her life, which is when she was underground. And I would not have had access to any information about that. And also just he's very brilliant and wonderful to talk to. And I learned a lot over how many hours did we talk, do you think? Many, many hours, very generous with his time. And then the wonderful Denis Ferry over here. We also spent a good deal of time on the phone, and Denis gave me a lot of insight into Rosemary's final chapter in the Santa Cruz area in Aptos, where she lived with Denis. And I got a really beautiful look at the kind of last decade of Rosemary's life for Denis. And I also got to listen to Denis's laugh, which is one of my favorite things in the world. And then through Denis, I met Maria. And Maria Mangini needs no introduction, especially for here. But Maria was the midwife to this book.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get emotional, but you were so helpful for me in terms of understanding not only the era and the context, but the greater themes that are in this book. And again, every single person on this stage were key and pivotal, and I could not have done it without them. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of them. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. This is a joy. The book was a joy to write. Best 4 years of my life. Changed me, made me, I think, a better person. And that is due to not only Rosemary, but the people who surrounded her. So thank you for having us. And we're gonna kind of have a conversation tonight where it's gonna be a bit informal. We're totally open to questions from the audience, I'm sure. But I think we're going to talk about Rosemary, and this would have been right after Rosemary's 90th birthday. So this is a birthday party in honor of Rosemary. We have a cake. Maybe we should sing happy birthday to her. I don't know if we'll go that far, but this is really an honoring of Rosemary. And yeah, so thank you for coming to the party.
Well, do you want to encourage one of your distinguished guests to say something?
Yeah. Does anyone? Do you want to? How can we start? Right. Yes. So yeah, let's start with Gary.
Gary Woodruff. I was 4 years old when Rosemary moved out of the house. Unhappily, she moved out. I didn't know her very well before. We had a very strong German grandmother who was moved into the house about the time I was born, and Rosemary left. I would tell you that there are people in this group here who spent more time with my sister than I did over the years. I was a conduit when she left. The last time I saw her after about a 20-year break, or before she left, I was with a friend in Hollywood. I had lunch with my sister, my friend went up to go to the bathroom and she said, I'm leaving. And I kind of got wide-eyed and said, what? She said, I'm leaving. Can't tell you anything. Take care of mom and dad. And she left. The FBI came and knocked, and we had a lot of things after that. We didn't see her for 3.5 years. We didn't talk to her for 2 or 3.5 years. I think my mother had
Some letters, yeah.
But I was sheltered out of this. I was on my way to Vietnam, and so as a soldier, so I was kind of lost in that whole thing. I am so honored to be here, and so honored that this book has been made, written about her, and I give credit to Susannah for doing this. Gentleman, when Rosemary passed, she carried a manuscript in her book all over the world. You were there when she was carrying the manuscript. I call it the SOB manuscript because I screwed it up one time trying to multi-copy it. But anyway, so when she passed, Kate and I became the trustees of her estate, and we really she put on one of her first arrests in Texas what her occupation was. And she put author. And author. She wanted to be an author. Or she said she was an author. And she'd written some things. So this is a culmination for me of the fact that the first book that was published, which is called
Psychedelic Refuge.
Prayers, was done, took the manuscript, and a gentleman by the name of David Phillips went through the whole thing, and he created a book which is published and is on Amazon, and you can buy it on Amazon. But the book took a lot of detective work on his part because Rosemary used false names, false places, and never finished the book. But the book was published, so I felt like, oh, good, I got it published, that my deal was done. And then this young lady shows up in our lives, and we had a lot of people show up who talked the talk, but big hat, no cattle. And we started a bromance or a romance. And her vision of the book, her vision of my sister, her conversations with other people made Katie and I incredibly comfortable that we should open everything up to her as much as we possibly can. And for all the people who ever see what this video is or who did talk to her and hear the story, I thank you. And this gentleman right here is one of them, very much, and Denis is very much of the people who talked to her and gave her insight. I'm excited to be here. I mean, I'm tired from the swimming, but I'm tired. I'm excited to be here.
That was self-inflicted, Dad.
And I'm excited the fact that you all came out today to hear this, and I hope we answer your questions. I hope you have an opportunity.
I hope
to
you
read the book.
leave here eager to go to your local bookseller
That's the sales pitch.
and purchase the Acid Queen, which
You know,
should have been here.
I haven't met you before today, Gary, and the first thing I did when I came into the room where you were was I said, I'm studying your face, I'm looking for the family resemblance, and I can really see it.
Yeah, same.
I can really see it.
She's much
And
prettier.
Rosemary, I don't know, Rosemary was absolutely the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And if you've ever seen the movie The Graduate, she looked like Catherine Ross, the woman who's the
Oh, wow.
romantic
The young
very
woman.
much so.
in that movie. And she was radiant and blessed with good genes, no question about it.
She looks like her. Sorry, not to.
Go.
No, she looks like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will welcome any comparison.
Kate, would you like to?
I just wanted to say that I'm so grateful that you're all here. Like, thank you for coming out to share this time and space with us. I knew Rosemary mostly as a child, but one thing that was very, very clear to me as I came into my young adulthood after her passing was that her deepest wish was for this story to be told. And again, David Phillips, the book The Psychedelic Refugee, which is based on her manuscript, is an incredibly deeply meaningful work, and he did wonders with it, and then we were incredibly grateful to him. He's since passed. But there were limitations on how and why Rosemary could tell her own story, and those limitations carried over to how and why David could tell the story. Essentially, in the foreword to his book, David said, she needs a biography. Like, this is one chapter, this is one perspective on a greater story that is yet to be told. And this woman here has answered that for us in a profoundly beautiful way. And I am beyond grateful to you for your time, your talent, your energy that you've put into. I mean, they're on one level, I'm glad that this story is being told because it's a story about a woman in a time when women were erased. And on one level, and I got huge, immense gratitude for that. But on a really base level, she was my aunt who I played backgammon with and who I loved so dearly. And this is answering something that I know she carried deep in her heart. So thank you. Thank you.
It was my pleasure and deepest honor to do
Well,
this.
now you're stuck with us.
Yeah.
So.
Great.
Tough.
Another story. But, John, would you like to talk a bit about your time? I guess maybe we'll set up how did you meet Rosemary, and then how did the kind of profound experience of your time underground, a bit about that, how that occurred.
How about the book first?
Okay. Thank you, John.
I can see that there are many of us who have been through this period of time. I'm talking about the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And for those of you who were in that period of time, you may understand this more because you witnessed it. To those who don't, who are from another generation, what was most important in this period of time was the fact that we were progressing through a patriarchal age, of which we're coming to a completion on. And under the patriarchal rule, so much of the active mythology of what we do, what we create, what we project has been guided by the patriarch. And certainly one of the things that fundamentally we sensed and discovered was there is no patriarch, there is no matriarch, there's us. But within this schism of us, the feminine story doesn't get told, it's hidden under a myth that sometimes has been identified as the muse. That's the part that women play in the creation of this masculine unfolding. But that's only because we're in the patriarchal age. So when Susannah and Gary got in touch with me and said that there was this investigative reporter who had some history of publishing, was all of a sudden interested in Rosemary. This was a real key moment because the story needs the feminine. The feminine needs to become stronger. As we pass through the matriarchal age, which was accented by Amazon warriors, and we went into the patriarchal age, these last for thousands of years, but we are in a transition. And what fundamentally, what we believed always was necessary was for the balancing. And what's even more necessary now is that the children who inherit the matriarch to patriarch to the ever-coming child, that the children receive the message from both the feminine and the masculine. If they only receive the message from the masculine, we're not going to go anywhere. We're stuck in the barnacles of 2,000-3,000 years of patriarchal rule. So for the children to hear the words and the life of the feminine is very important. And for that, I supported Susannah completely in this work. And having been in places and woven back and forth since Millbrook, since the mid-60s, with all of this atmosphere of characters playing out on the real stage of life, I was thrilled that finally her story was going to be revealed by the feminine. I think that's also important. So I'm grateful that she's come back around again, but with the message that will enhance and move forward our collective consciousness, which those of you who remember the molecular jingle of the 60s is all we ever wanted to do. All we ever wanted to do was dramatically change the world. And I think Rosemary is just one of those people that help move that forward.
Don't make me.
I know.
Don't make me talk after John.
That is wildly unfair. Do you want to drop it? Do you want to drop your voice into like a very deep register?
I'll do that. No, actually, I had a small experience of Rosemary, small experience of Timothy. I experienced Timothy when I was quite a young person and very impressionable, and he was a plausible boy with a smile that wrapped all the way around his face, very charming person. It was very interesting to see the details of the life that Rosemary lived with him as you laid them out in the book, because they make him look like a dreadful individual, whom I really probably would not have liked very well. And the things that I think I know about his history, professional history, social history, all of that were enticing and attractive to me are still in my memory bank. But now I have this experience that his partner had of trying to be in relationship to him in the fullness of her integrity and capacity, and he was not really very spacious about that. And I think that's part of how we can understand. I think a lot of people know the mythology of the major players of that period. Most of them are guys, and I think this is an important addition to that kind of understanding.
And do you want to talk about how you first met Timothy and then met Rosemary?
That's true. I had met Timothy originally in Los Angeles at a business called Dial a Wife, and a friend of his called me up when his wife left him. And I used to shop for him and run errands, and we became good friends. And I remember the first time I met Rosemary was at Tim's house. And someone had just paid the fee for her to go back to court because she was still wanted. She was still on some list, and she was in Orange County, and they had filed papers so that she could actually come out as who she was. And that was the first time I met her. And then after Tim's death, we eventually moved in together and lived for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, you probably know, in Santa Cruz. And after her death, she was a trustee for Tim's estate, and after her death, I became the trustee for his estate. So it's interesting. I certainly agree with what John said about the fact that I always thought, because we were trying to keep his books, being published, and all these movie deals, and I always thought Rosemary's story, it's the same story, most of it, as Tim's after Harvard. You got the prison break, you got the undercover, you got, Africa, you've got the whole thing. But I just felt like her story was a much better way to tell it. And I think partly from what you're saying, because there was so much more depth to her as a person, really. And also, so few stories from the 60s are about women. We have, I just want to say a couple of the things we brought some mementos, and one of the things that we have is from her memorial, the picture book of who was there. And there are probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 women and all these men. I mean, granted, they were
Mostly enamored with her.
they were, you know, Ralph Metzner, Eugene Schoenfeld. I mean, these were really important men of that period. But, and they were there, you know, to honor Rosemary. So I think I'm so glad her story's been told.
So maybe you want to talk a little bit about New York Public Library, because the work, Denis, that you did in getting it, and then eventually, and the kind of, I don't know, I think it's a character in this, and an important one, in terms of getting these archives in New York Public Library, the library party that you two attended, and then you eventually getting the archives into, in 2016, into the New York Public Library, like what that means to like psychedelic history. I think everyone can really speak to that in terms of like, also getting Rosemary's in is affirming the feminine history too, is it having its place in history.
And not having her archives subsumed.
It not within
Into
Timothy's,
this,
like
like
as wholly on its own.
If I may, David Phillips was very instrumental in this for me. He taught Katie, or Katie taught, they played this form of backgammon, so they did their own thing. But he was very clear. We talked about the archives because they were sitting in my garage after I packed them up and brought them into Long Beach. And I'd pick a box up and I'd open it and I'd go down the rabbit hole. And 2 days later I'd come out and I got nothing done. So they arranged to have the New York Public Library appraise them and take them to the archives. But our stipulation, and David pushed this through, was that she had to have her own archives. Because Rosemary has faded in. If you Google Rosemary Woodruff Leary, she's mentioned as one of 3 or 4 wives. If you look at Wikipedia, she had a Wikipedia page, it disappeared. There's a whole thing where the history got rewritten or left out. And you know, what John said so eloquently is that this is a time where, you know, the women of the 60s, who were very influential to the men of the 60s, who were the backstop of that they get their due. And I hope there's more in this direction. But the funny story was we had somebody approach us for a book deal. Or it used to be a movie deal. Had a lot of movie deals. None of them went anywhere. And this woman said, "I want to pitch it to Netflix." And she said, and I said, I gave her permission to pitch it to Netflix, and called her about a month later and said, "What happened?" She says, "Well, I pitched to my friend at Netflix, and they said they had a bunch of Tim Leary stuff on option, and they didn't need another story." And my attitude was, "Oh, my sister just got screwed again." And so that's why when we started working with you, that's why I was so skeptical at first when we first started talking.
Yeah.
Like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah.
So.
You know, it's a statistical likelihood that women live longer than men. So that now that we're reaching into the part of life
Oh,
where
yeah.
a lot of
Yeah, very smart.
the elders have passed away, the absence of the particularly the paper archive, the kind of archive that you preserved, or that Michael Horowitz preserved, or that Timothy created, or that Rosemary carried around with her when she was traveling, those things not only didn't get created because they implicated people in things that they could get into big trouble for, but then also even when people created those archives, sometimes they were actively destroyed as people felt the hot breath of repression on their necks. And so there really is this enormous gap where the records of what really happened during that period in history just don't exist. And we have an opportunity now because particularly those elder and pioneer women, a lot of them are still living, and some of the men as well, but the women are living now. We have an opportunity to collect those stories and to know them, and I'm so grateful to you, Susannah, for having had the insight to appreciate that that was going to be something that I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about like 100 years in the future, when people want to look back and see what happened during that period when society was so substantially transformed. There's going to actually be some legit material, some like real archival records that represent what happened then, as opposed to like the story that some dominant factor might want to write, or the victor belongs to the spoils and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, thank you. We got to do it.
Yeah,
There are worthwhile projects that are underway right now in doing that very thing, that mostly focus on women, right?
We're not done with you.
Woodruffs aren't done with you. Psychedelics aren't done with you.
No, I mean, do we want want to open up questions, do you think? I mean, we could talk forever, so.
I wouldn't be surprised if there are people who have questions.
Yeah, and if there's not, we can still continue talking, but if anyone, right now, just a little break, yeah.
So, Gary, I had a crazy older sister, and I was just wondering, like, when did her life make sense? Because
Well, that's a
presumably,
great question.
for most of the time, you said you were like the straight kid,
Yeah, I was worried that I wouldn't get a scholarship to a Christian college because my sister was busted in Texas. I mean, yeah, that's,
Well, she was really notorious too. So.
Yeah, but I had a really weird opinion of myself at that point in time. That she was impacting me, and it wasn't the case. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
But the question was, when did her life make sense to you?
When I read Susannah's book.
Oh.
And that was, when I read the first book that David did, it put a lot of pieces together. But when I started working with Susannah, and she would tell me things that I did not know, or things that those boxes that I sent to the New York Public Library that I had never looked at, she found recipes. She found letters that I'd written from Vietnam. She found letters my mom.
She would send me pictures of myself from the 3rd grade that were in a card that, yeah.
So-
or like my scrawl on my report card.
To answer your question, I wish I had a better answer. And we were
No,
talking-
because my sister still doesn't make any sense
Really?
to me.
I have to ask, what's kind of crazy?
Well, she just left because, like, she basically had a totally different life. She was 18 years old.
See, that's the thing, she
Right.
was considered like older than Gary
Yeah.
too, 12 years older? 14 years
Okay.
older. So you have
Different
different
life.
childhoods, you
Yeah.
know, that's a different, they're basically not a
We
sibling.
moved from California. We moved from St. Louis to California. Rosemary was gone when I left St. Louis at 4. And so throughout the years that she would show up, with Susannah outlines in the book, I got the opportunity to take accordion lessons from a very famous accordion jazz guy. Who she married.
Yeah.
I got to hear about other people. We heard a lot of rumors. It turns out that I didn't know my mother was in contact with her as much as Susannah's pointed out, letters. I met Tim, kind of wide-eyed. We went to one of the festivals they did in Laguna. I think my mom almost fell asleep during it. My dad was
Nana went to one of the festivals.
I don't like the sound of that.
Sorry, that's new for me.
Yeah, but and we didn't realize that we didn't run in that world, so we didn't realize it was rock royalty. So I parlayed being Tim's brother-in-law in a lot of different ways over my life. It's a good conversation starter. It's like, how many times can you figure out how to say I'm Tim Leary's brother-in-law? In Vietnam, I had Tim Leary for governor on my helmet.
Oh, wow.
I have a picture of that. And I have friends from Vietnam who have called me and said, "Were you really Tim Leary's brother-in-law?" So yeah, I can appreciate your 18-year thing. They grew up in a different world. They take a different path.
Did you ever do LSD?
No,
Okay.
not yet.
So yeah, that's a big difference, right?
That'll be one of the
It's still on the table.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is.
That's a problem we can solve.
Listen, this is a long, slow project.
Yeah, where I'm coming from. I had my sex, drugs, and rock and roll years. Okay. No, I think that now talking to you folks who have friends and relatives who are is time to talk to them. Sit down. I wish I'd have sat down with her more often and had a good bottle of wine and asked some hard questions and had listened and didn't just I took the easy path. And I'm going to regret it, but Susannah has taken me down a path. This gentleman here and Denis, I don't speak with them often enough, but they're a wealth of knowledge. We had brought some artifacts today, and the history of some of those artifacts, we had no idea what they were. They were in our safety deposit box, and we went through, and you have to write this up for me because I won't remember.
So could you tell us about some of those?
About what?
What you just saw?
Artifacts?
Yeah.
Well, today, the belt.
What?
The belt.
Oh, artifacts.
Sorry. I'm just curious.
NYU, mid-60s. Electric Circus was being built. Alan Watts, Allen Ginsberg were building bridges from the west to the east, and a lot of changes were going on. I was invited, I was at NYU studying classical Indian music on the side, and my teacher said, "There's a party tonight, and I think you should come." And it was by, the party was given by a wonderful, wonderful other woman. I'm sorry, I love ladies. Okay, I mean, men are all right, but I'd rather be up in the bleachers with the women watching the guys beat each other up on the field. And Nena Graboy, and if you can find it, one step into the future, Nena Graboy was the Peggy Guggenheim, the Doris Duke of the psychedelic world. Okay, she's got a wonderful book. She came out of concentration camp during the war, and she became the center in New York City for the burgeoning psychedelic revolution. And she had a party that night, and I went to the party, and that was the first time I saw Rosemary, and Timothy, and Allen Ginsberg, and Alan Watts, and Ralph Metzner, and Richard Alpert, all fresh out of Mexico, transitioning to Melbrook, and starting the next evolution of what was going to happen. That relationship kept going in Melbrook. I was one of the founding members of the League for Spiritual Discovery, which was a move in anticipation of the pushback that once the executive branch of the United States understood what we were really doing, they were going to come down heavy on us. And what we were really doing was just saying every individual should have a right to explore their personal spiritual evolvement. And if they so wish to do it with a wafer in front of a Catholic priest, or they wish to do it with Samu, the chief of the Navajo Peyote tribe, or be a real psychonaut and take this new molecule called LSD on their own because no one else had done it. This was what we were doing. And during that period of time was the beginning of the push of the US government. And it began with a raid on Melbrook in '67. There were a few people. I happened to be getting brown rice up in New York at this exact moment. But 40 police officers, sheriff's department, state police, and Poughkeepsie police raided Melbrook in the middle of winter and had half-naked people standing out in the snow while they explored the entire property of a 64-room house that was built in the 30s to be a casino. That was Millbrook, that Hitchcock's gave to Leary and Metzner and Alpert. And people were arrested, of which one, Rosemary was one, and there's really good recording of this because Rosemary was the first person to go before a federal judge on charges of not revealing what was going on in her spiritual religious life. And she stayed in jail for months because she refused to give any answers.
I have a printed transcript from
Yeah.
that court hearing, and it's really, flipping through it is really, because she must have been so focused, and so her responses were consistent, again, just remarkable resolve.
It was a focusing time because the things that were coming at us were now the first things that were being pushed back on what we were doing. And during the trial, the judge discovered that there was no search warrant.
Whoopsie.
So we had to throw the whole case out. But who was the leader that brought the flag in with the police and made all this happen.
Gordon Liddy.
The Assistant Deputy Attorney General of Poughkeepsie County, and his name was G. Gordon Liddy. So we were not blindly going into all of this. We sort of understood what was happening. Years later, when Tim and Rosemary were arrested in California and in Texas, Tim decided to run for governor of California, of which you had one of the
I've got artifacts of that.
John Lennon wrote "Come Together," which was really the song for that. But that was all put to an end because Timothy had stepped over the line and now was going to take votes.
Wait, this is the Summer of Love?
After, way
Okay,
after,
okay,
years
okay.
after Summer of Love.
Okay.
And during that period of time, the federal government took over everything. Before, we were dealing with local police. All of a sudden, the local police stepped back, and these black cars with guys with suits and ties in the summer in Laguna Beach would sit in cars and watch houses.
But, and can someone correct me here, but didn't Tim go on tour, a lecture tour with
Yes.
Gordon Liddy?
Yes, in the 80s.
In later years.
Like that's, just to show the evolution of like where people's
We're very
loyalties
excited about
lay. Like Tim and Gordon went on a lecture tour together, and there was even an article in Stone about them becoming like BFFs.
I can tell you a little Gordon Liddy
Oh,
story.
sorry.
Gordon Liddy made a political reputation by persecuting the people at Millbrook. He was very popular in the Hudson Valley. He was going to run for the congressional seat that represents that part of New York against Hamilton Fish. Hamilton Fish was the son of a family that had held that seat for several generations, and they were terrified that Liddy would run against him in the Republican primary. And so they promised him that if he would not run against Hamilton Fish, that they would get him a job in the Nixon administration when Fish won, which is how he became a woman. Wow. He built his reputation on persecuting the people of New York.
And then made money in his later years by touring as a person who persecuted people at Millbrook alongside Tim.
And this is my little piece of the story. I and Noel Tepper, who appears in Susannah's book, who was Tim and Rosemary's lawyer at that time, after that was all over and the people at Millbrook had dispersed, Noel and I and Gordon Liddy and another Vassar student had a debate in the parlor of the house that I lived in at Vassar about whether drugs were a pernicious element and whether our children were being pickled.
But when he was his dirtiest self, right? You're talking about meeting him when he was like boasting of
Oh, yeah.
persecuting hippies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He said he was going to squash me like a bug.
Yeah.
Amazing. You are so powerful.
The
Children were being
The event of him running for governor changed the dynamics. So the next time he was arrested in Richard Nixon's area of Orange County, the judge refused bail. And the smiles were smiles, but internally, this was devastating because we began to realize, okay, the pressure's on. And that's when I re-hooked up with Rosemary. And we created Holding Together, which was the defense fund, to raise money for the cost of defending. But that was really just a cover, because we knew he'd never be released. And he asked his wife, Rosemary, get me out of here. And that's exactly what she did. In the 10 or 15 years of On the Run, we had to depend upon some interesting characters, some scabby characters, some criminals, and some saints to help us. And every one of them, whether they were a general of the military that was picking us up, or the head lawyer of the Senate of a country, one thing they all wanted to do was to meet Rosemary. And the fundamental reason that these men and women of power wanted to meet her was they wanted to meet someone that really broke her husband out of jail, who was jailed. And she did that, along with a lot of people's help. Years later, when Tim was arrested, he spilled the beans. That included over 59 people to be indicted. One of those people happened to be the head nurse of Mayo Clinic. Why? Because when we needed a passport, we went to her to find a baby that was born at the time that the person was, so she could pull the death certificate, make it a birth certificate, and send it off to us. And this was done not only for Timothy, for a number of political prisoners during that time, including Elridge Cleaver and a number of others. So there was a group of people that were not just, quote, drug dealers, hippies, communists. These were well-established people that understood that something was going on that needed correction. And when Tim turned state evidence, this was key for Richard Nixon and his cohorts, including Liddy and Mitchell, in that, in his raving paranoia, Richard Nixon felt that there was a conspiracy against the United States of America, specifically him. And it included some key people. Liberal lawyers, Jewish financiers, communists, hippies, drug dealers, and terrorists. Well, all those boxes got clicked off because all those people were involved in the jailbreak. That put Rosemary's life on the run underground for more than a decade. And this was while we were in Villars, John Mitchell flew over to speak to the Switzerlands about denying them asylum. So when he got arrested and they had a case, this became a very big event for the United States of America. And so for 10 years, we had every policing agency in the world, Interpol, federal agents, United States, NSA, CIA, looking for us. And we disappeared because Rosemary would never, ever tell anyone who helped. Character. Real character. It was not easy. It was a sacrifice. But there are 59 people that lived their lives and continued doing what good they did from the very beginning because of it. These were some of the things that Suzanne was able to discover and bring out from a lot of different directions. But from the fundamentals, for 10 years, we had to disappear behind the veil, dissolve and coagulate from one reality to another. And in her little leather case, she carried the papers that she wrote her memoirs on and could never finish. And it's a pleasure to see that through Psychedelic Refugee and now The Acid Queen, that this is all coming full circle. And it's a story worth reading.
The gentleman over there.
Wanted to ask about, you mentioned a few women, let's say, at the funeral. I wanted to know about, like, beyond the funeral, what women were in the scene. And I don't know, as I was sitting here, if, like, Huxley's wife was ever a part of that circle. She died before. So that was one question, and I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for the second question, but I did want to pick up on a comment that you said, you think the patriarchy is dying and we're coming into a matriarchy. I would love to chat with you on how the heck you think that is playing out right now. I pray your words.
I'm gonna step in real quickly. First of all, I just want to go on record as saying gender is not binary, and female, like there's a whole spectrum, and it's beautiful, and I hope that we're moving towards the more acceptance of that. That's to start. But the way I'm currently trying to engage and interact with politics is I look at it as an extinction event. So does anybody have a point of reference for that? So an extinction event in like biology is that when you see a behavior or a circumstance that's getting aggressively challenged, it kicks up, it increases. It happens with toddlers too. Like you have a toddler that has a behavior that you want to try to extinguish, you set some boundaries in place, they kick up, they rage and they roar and they scream, and then they tire themselves out. Granted, with a toddler, an extinction event is maybe a month or two. We're talking about decades, we're talking about much longer, but I think what John is talking about, and I don't want to speak for him, is that I've got little kiddos. So my greatest hope is that he's in some way right, and that this is the beginning of an extinction event, that what we are witnessing is a reaction to a movement towards something different.
And I'm willing to just talk and get back to the book focus, which was
Yeah,
about who are
yeah.
the women players.
Yeah.
You know,
But that's my, if that's helpful at all.
Yeah.
They're sitting here.
Yeah.
Two of them are right here, women players. I mean, Peggy Hitchcock was a big one, I would say.
At the funeral?
I'm not at a funeral.
But I was just saying, I think, yeah.
Who are the other women who
The
were
other
sitting at the
in the
table?
orbit, right, it
Yes.
was sitting at the table. I think Peggy Hitchcock was a major name.
Who is not here and could easily be here, but unfortunately she lives in another part of the state, is Val Corral.
Val, yeah.
Who's definitely, she was there. And Val is another one who's a major political hero in lots of.
Could you say the first and last name?
Valerie Leveroni Corral.
Oh, she's a friend.
There you go.
Random.
Congratulations.
That was easy.
Can I say something?
Yeah, you call on questions. This one,
Yeah, I love the political implications, and I love hearing the stories. But I just want to speak to, I was a young man, a young boy, becoming a man in the early '90s, and starting to take LSD and learning these stories, and her vibration. How do I say this? I think the first time I met a goddess
Wow.
was through hearing her read the psychedelic prayers, the recording of it.
Wow.
And I would just love to speak to that vibration that's emanating through her voice in those recordings. And just the profundity of that and what it meant to my life and people that I've shared that with. And it's really special to be in this room with people celebrating her, because her life has been something really I never met her, obviously. And it's just been like this little private thing, and it's really beautiful, and I just really want to celebrate your bringing forth your story, and I'm just eager also to see it spread in the world. And I guess I'd be curious, is there any other types of media artifacts like that exist that are like kind of like emanating? I mean, do you want to speak to that?
I had the same relationship with her voice too. I had, when I first heard her speak, because there are recordings in the New York Public Library that exist, and then also just various things that I was able to find. But she had as beautiful as she looked, she sounded just as beautiful. And I think that her voice resonated with me deeply as well. I had that same experience. I remember having my headphones on in a crowded archival room in the New York Public Library and hearing her talk on a local San Francisco Bay Area radio station, and I had chills throughout my whole body. So I think we share that love of the sound. I mean, it's just she had almost a transcontinental accent, like something from a different time, but it was soft and it almost like it was both soft and strong, which was really. Did you have that experience as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just again, as a young boy becoming a man, just that, the potency of her femininity,
Yes.
the transmission of that, it really changed the course of my life.
Wow.
It was the beginning of the whole.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. Hey, just real quickly,
Yes.
don't miss that opportunity to drop some acid sometime and listen to that.
I'm really working on set and setting. Okay?
Yeah.
And I have some very strong people around me who make sure the set and the setting is proper. And, yes, I thank you for that. Yes, sir.
And now for something completely different. Page 88, there's reference to a quote from Carl Jung about gifts of the gods
Yes.
cost you very dearly. And then in the notes, you get a reference to Jules Evans,
Yes.
the 5 reservations about psychedelic therapy and ecstatic integration. Has that ever been anthologized or
Oh.
reprinted?
I think it's available online, but I can probably send it to you if you'd like to see it. If you want to
Give me
email my.
Yeah, I'll give you my email.
Yeah, that's where it's not anthologized, it's all online. It's like I think it's his own kind of, maybe a Substack kind of thing, I'm sure,
I mean,
but,
that's my primary interest in this is,
oh, I would,
But,
that's a
yeah.
good one. I think I highly recommend reading that, for sure.
let's hear what somebody else has to say.
What you're seeing revealed at the moment is the quality of Susannah's scholarship. I think she's written a very readable and potentially very popular book, but she's done a really credible job of documenting the things that she said, and I appreciate that a lot. Deeply, deep. Can we talk about the New York Public Library?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I want to say how that happened.
We're going to the signing of the New York Public Library, Katie,
Yeah.
so we're gonna be there. So I have not seen the archives yet, and I'm excited.
For those of you who don't have a lot of East Coast experience, the New York Public Library is like the temple of learning for a city of immigrants, for a city of people who came from different cultures and were trying to figure out how to be part of this one. And it's say about the lions.
lions, yeah,
Patience and temperance.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Oh, patience
Yeah.
and fortitude, sorry.
Yeah.
Patience
Yeah,
and fortitude.
it's like a cathedral,
Yeah.
really, the
Yeah,
library.
it is a cathedral to-
It is
to
a
knowledge.
cathedral to knowledge,
Yeah.
yeah, it's beautiful if you've never been there.
In the stair, you just feel like you're entering. And when I was doing the research in this book, it was during the pandemic and it was closed to the public. And I had the opportunity, because I was a researcher in residence, that I had access to the library. I was really the only person there for, at least it felt like it. I was in rooms no
I
one
don't
was
get
in.
FOMO often,
It was
but
really
I
good.
think you just gave me
It was
FOMO.
one upside to that experience, and yeah, it was amazing to sit in a room, an empty room with her archives, and I mean, just working with the archives themselves, touching the pages that she had touched and seeing her, there's her handwriting, there's a photograph, there's her birth certificate, there's, her tax returns, it was really incredible, but, yeah, the library is a very special place.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have happened, none of that would have happened without it starting with really Denis is the reason that Rosemary's there and Timothy Leary's there. And at the New York Public Library there, Timothy Leary has about 400 bankers boxes of material that anyone can access. If you go to the New York Public Library, you can request access and you can see them. And Rosemary has about 25 boxes, which you can also access. But the long odyssey that went into that, Timothy's papers getting there, can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, Tim had, he really understood how important, I think his legacy, but also just the psychedelic legacy. And so he had been collecting these papers and, well, his birth certificate is there. So but particularly after Harvard, and at Harvard, they had offices there, so everything was organized, but somehow he carried those with him or found places and people who would keep them. So this had been going on for decades. And when I knew him, a lot of them were in his house, and people would come through and, be looking through it. A lot of them had coffee stains on them. I mean, that was just kind of, it was a little more casual. but basically, he kept these papers together or brought them back together for years and years and years. And by the time he passed, and Rosemary became a trustee of the estate, and then by the time I took them over, they were all together and in storage. And so we looked for years and years and years for a home for these papers. It was like Tim's biggest wish was to have these papers in a safe place, in a prestigious place, in a place where people could come and study them. And so I finally found an agent who was in New York who was a big wheeler dealer, and he approached the New York Public Library and convinced them to buy these papers. I think he told them there were a couple hundred boxes. I think we had like 500. And they had no idea there were so many. And so it was there was that whole thing that went on. But it was really, and what it really meant to so many people, particularly people in the psychedelic community, because the library paid almost $1 million for these papers, which was unheard of. But what it did was give credibility to this group of people and to this movement that had happened. And it's still to this day one of the most popular collections there. People coming in and looking for things, studying.
Dennis,
going
did
through
all the
them.
boxes make it into the collection?
All the boxes did not make it into.
And what happened to those?
Well,
Oh,
ta-da. Well, some of them just went away. Bruce Damer took some of them. He has a collection. Timothy had a clipping service, and I don't know how many, probably 50, maybe 30 boxes were clippings. Just
Every time
clippings.
his name appeared.
Yeah, every time his name appeared, so they didn't want those.
Like
I
the
think
Google
Bruce-
alert of
Right.
But you know, you have to have an image of, I haven't seen Rosemary's archives, but the things, I have seen some of the Leary archives, some of the ones that Bruce has and some of the ones that were on show at the New York Public Library. And there is a letter from the landlady of a house that Timothy rented in Berkeley, complaining about the damage that was done to the house while he lived there. And one of the things is, and someone took a fork and scratched it across the top of the dining room table. And I thought, yeah, I bet somebody actually did that. It gives you this sense of like how unstructured activities were at that time. And then there are things like copies of the psychological instruments that he designed, which he then was subjected to evaluation using the instruments that he had written, which was part of how he got himself in a situation where he could get out of prison. Was he persuaded by answering the questions in a way that he understood how to answer them? He was able to persuade the prison system that he was a harmless, rather doddery old man who should go to a pretty low-key kind of zone. You know? I mean, the archives are what reveals that stuff for people in the future.
Yes.
And I'm sure that they exist for Rosemary's archives too, because they're.
Oh, she kept everything.
Yeah.
The receipts, but like birthday card, and I also, much like my dad, attempted a pass at some of those boxes, and much like my dad, felt kind of overwhelmed by the emotional weight of all of it, and getting them to the New York Public Library, where we knew they would be safe, where we knew they would be accessible, was a profound relief. Is that fair to say? A profound relief for both of us, because we knew we had been given this legacy. We had been bestowed this legacy, and it making sure that we behaved with integrity, and as much integrity as Rosemary, in dealing with it was something that I think sat heavy on both of our hearts. So
Boy, I love my daughter.
In saying how capricious the things in the New York Public Library are, I'm reminded of something which occurs in the book, and that John, I was really hoping maybe you might say something about this, because it's a real spunky kind of thinking about Rosemary's spirit, about how it was that she re-entered the United States when she actually came back to the United States. Is the story that Susannah tells, I bet you, Yeah, do you, like, do you?
I'd love to hear this because it's a story I've heard since childhood and I don't know.
Yeah, it began when the NSA discovered from satellite supervision that they saw Rosemary pass Robert Vesco's boat. And through our connections, we got the word. And this was one of those times where there was no breathing. You had to move. Because when things get that kind of close, they didn't have any clue where we were, but now they did. That started what was probably the last skip. We were given assisted asylum in Costa Rica from a underground financier named Robert Vesco. I don't know if any of you know
He was
that
a
name.
criminal.
Really? What did we do?
No. I'm just saying that was his reputation.
Yes. When you're running away from every executive policing agency in the world, sometimes you have to turn to unscrupulous people.
No
But
judgment.
he was scrupulous enough that he understood that his obligation to protect us was paramount. And so we got a message that he's sending a plane, and we were in an island of Caribou Indians in Panama. That's how far out we had gotten. And so we immediately had to go to Panama, and not knowing what the next step was, in Panama, we arrived and we went into the hotel by the side entrance and took a shower and all that because it was the first time we were in a hotel for months. And we went out and walked around, but Rosemary got very sweaty and nervous. She thought we were being followed. So we happened to be in a part of Panama where there's this jewelry store that has two roads on either side, and it's at the V. So we went in one door, looked around the jewelry, and exited the other door and watched. And nobody was following us. But she was very nervous. So we immediately went back to the hotel, only we came to the main entrance. And as we walked up the step, here was this big billboard saying, the 23rd International Conference for Interpol. So in our hotel and everywhere around were probably the man, and she instinctively was right. Some of the family that's always been around sent an airplane, and that airplane was given permission to park at the Panamanian International Airport, and whatever we wanted to do, nobody was to bother us. We were to get on that plane and let us go wherever we wanted to go. And one of the family's pilots were there. We got in the plane, we started to take off. And I said, where are we going? And the pilot turned to us and said, wherever you wanted to go. Oh. Now we're up in the air. Fortunately, we had a twin engine with tanks, turboprop. And so I asked Rosemary, can I have that pin from your hat? And put the pin where we left and made the amount of gas that the plane had. We made a circle. And from 7 in the morning to almost 7 at night, we landed wherever we could to refuel in that circle. And now we were at the upper part of the Bahamas, and it was getting nighttime. And I had remembered from my youth that there's this island called Bimini. You might know Bimini because that was the place that Ernest Hemingway hung out about and fished. And I knew they had an airport, so we landed there in the middle, just at nighttime when nobody was at the airport, and we found ourselves now in Bimini. And the plane had to leave, it couldn't sit there, so go ahead. And we're sitting in Bimini not knowing where to go. Called some people we knew, and they supplied a cigarette for us. So we loaded our luggage early in the morning
Cigarette
into the
boat.
cigarette
boat.
cigarette race boat. And we decided there's no other place we can go except back to the United States. We were out of places. 10 years on the run, you burn a lot, especially when you have to leave, when you're told, oh, I think you should leave. Oh, really? By when? Well, by tomorrow morning would be fine. Oh, okay. And so in the race boat, as we were coming across the ocean, the Gulf, we realized, well, wait a minute. We're on this speedboat, we've got luggage, we've got big communication machines that we could talk internationally with without other communications. It was just a little intense, and we decided, well, let's go into Coconut Grove. I know the harbor and the captain understood, but we just can't come in a race boat and unload luggage. So call some friends to bring the cart for the boat. And before we come into the harbor, let's throw some water skis out and we'll water ski into Coconut Grove so we don't bring any attention to ourselves, right? We're driving a international world-class race boat, which just does ocean racing, and we're skiing behind it into Coconut Grove because that shouldn't bring attention. And that's when we found ourselves back in the United States, to answer your question.
There were a couple other questions too, so.
Did that answer what anyone wanted?
Did it work? Did it work?
I ask myself that every night,
but
every so often when I wake up in a cold sweat.
Did you
Did it
attract
work?
any attention? Did you manage to just infiltrate the U.S.?
Yeah, we're here.
No, I mean like without getting busted.
We've never been busted. That was the one thing that is a blessing. With all of these people looking for us and all of the things that can happen to one, God willing, we were never arrested. It just wasn't an option. Because arrested, bingo, we were going to jail without $200 escape.
That's an amazing story. How many of you were on the run at that time?
Rosemary and myself,
Just two.
just two of us.
Uh-huh. Who's on the skis?
Pardon?
Who's on the skis?
I was on the ski.
So I'm dying to ask this question. Well, first off, thank you, all of you, so much for pouring your life energy into all of this and educating, coming here today to share the wisdom that you've all thus acquired through the knowledge of Rosemary and your experience, which is something that I won't ever have. So thank you so much for writing this book. Personally for me, I've never done LSD. I've done like Wachuma or MD. Well, besides the point, psychedelic has been such a great entry point for me to wake up and figure out my own orientation around spirituality. And John, what you mentioned about patriarchy, making way for the balance of matriarchy, you guys paving the way for that to arise. I've noticed in my own personal history how much wounding patriarchy has done on my own system and also impacted my confidence in this reality or epoch that I currently am a part of. And I'm again feeling a lot of gratitude that you guys are all here today, and to even speak about that, I didn't come in here knowing that you guys would talk about that, and that's been such a huge theme since I've gone on my own spiritual journey of wow, where is the matriarch? Where is the femininity? And I want to hear from whoever feels alive to answering these questions, what your thoughts are around what this new era of matriarchy should look like, would look like, or what you've personally become in touch in relationship to matriarchy, or if there's any deities or myths that feel like you strongly resonate with. I'd love to hear your spiritual orientation around all of this.
Well, I think there's an archetypal image, which is the three faces of women: the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And a good place to begin for me would be for us to equally recognize and reverence all three.
In archetypes, which are very important, that was something that early on in Millbrook we realized that there were a set of molecular jingles that just had source information. Jung was into this. He understood this. And in this archetype of matriarch, patriarch, and the ever-coming child, the balance here is the re-entrance of the matriarch, not to rule, but to have a voice to the child coming, so that the child just doesn't hear what the father says, which will just bring more of the same kind of. So the feminine really modifies the masculine. The one thing on a mythological level is, if you find a partner who you're going to work with, the archetype of artist muse, over. Old time. It's partnership. And the partnership can be seen most clearly for the West in 2 tarot cards. Number 6, the Lovers. That's where 4 hands are joined on a work. But the higher of the Lovers is 14, art. And that's where the 4 hands become 2. And that's the magic. Because what a male and a feminine energy working on the same matter does is so much more than if it's just the feminine or just the masculine exercising it. And that was probably the most fundamental thing I discovered in the intense 10 years with Rosemary, is we were partners in magic and discovery. I wasn't her muse, she wasn't my muse. We worked on this together, and as a result, the work was greater. Something that Tim used but never truly understood, the power of the woman. He used it, but he never understood it. So the magic is in this 4 hands becoming 2. And as archetypes, all mythology is good. If you're looking to where to start, Bullfinch's mythology. Bullfinch's is a magnificent catalog of the essences of mythological archetypes in multiple cultures across the board. It's a great entrance. With regard to feminine, yes. Look to 3 tarot cards for the definition of the higher order of feminine. Okay, the Empress, which she takes the power of Earth along with the Emperor, 3 and 4. Number 2, the High Priestess, the highest feminine. And then number 1, which a lot of people say is the masculine, but it isn't. It's the androgynous. So it's feminine or masculine. So in those images are some little indications of where to find your inspiration and trust it.
One more question. You had a question.
Well, yeah, I did have, this is in regards to the whole masculine, feminine thing, and I read a book some years ago by Dr. Leonard Shlain. Is anybody here familiar with that? He wrote a book called the alphabet versus the goddess.
Oh,
And he says that, yeah, when he was on tour years ago in ancient, and they were talking about different temples and that were consecrated to the worship of female gods. And at some point in history, certain people they tore them all down, they renamed them and reconsecrated them to the and he says at this time kind of corresponded with the invention of the alphabet, and he suggests that this whole masculine and feminine thing resides in the hemispheres of our brain, being that the left hemisphere is primarily, for right-handed people, is primarily where the male kind of characteristics are, and the female in the right hemisphere. And so, and we all balance to one another, but I think that perhaps this swing that we're happening today could be as a result of the new kind of media that we are being exposed to, which involves visual and hearing. Whereas when you're just writing with your right hand and you're reading, which is processed in your left brain, y'all following me here?
Yeah.
So I think that has something to do, and the society that we live in has been here for thousands of years, since the invention of that alphabet, and we still live in it. And so, and he, in his book, he gets in great detail about the swing, because it's swung back and forth from, male dominance and female, there's been different, all through in different cultures and different levels. He gets into pretty good detail about that, but my view of the world has been kind of really shaped why our world is, and I think that our world would honestly be in a lot more balance had we had a more of a matriarchal society, because the right hemisphere of the brain sees the bigger picture about things. Anyway, that's it's probably more of a comment.
Even just if the history was known, was basically, even if, just the fact that was erased.
Yeah.
It might have changed things, just to have
Yeah.
it not have been desecrated or hidden if it was out in the open, that we have this past. Yeah, I think that's really
Well,
interesting.
I would suggest checking out that book.
I know, it's been on my to-read list for a while, actually, so this is my sign that I have to read that, so thank you. I think this is where
We're coming to the end.
Yes.
I see this sign that says I want to say a little thing.
Tiny question, and I was like 4 minutes late, so excuse my ignorance if you covered this at the beginning, but I'm just curious for you how you got interested in the bigger picture in this period of time and in this culture, and then in Rosemary in general, a little bit about your journey, how you came to this.
Excellent question.
Thank you for asking. My first book was a memoir called Brain on Fire, which was about an experience I had with an autoimmune encephalitis of my brain. I had hallucinations and psychosis, so I've always been really interested in altered states, especially since that experience. And I wrote a second book, someone here who was involved in that book, called The Great Pretender, which was about diagnosis and the limits of science and medicine and potentials there too. But in both books I talked about psychedelics. In my first book, ketamine actually affects the similar part of the brain that the illness that I had, the NMDA receptor. And in my second book, I wrote about Humphrey Osmond and the creation of the creation of psychiatric hospitals, that he worked with an architect and actually gave the architect LSD. This is the time when he considered LSD to be a psychotomimetic, and so we could understand madness more. So both of those elements were in my previous books, and I'd had many people reach out to me asking me to compare the psychotic experience to the psychedelic one. So that was in the back of my mind, and it's just kind of, it's in the culture, it's very interesting, I'm really interested in consciousness in general. And so I started looking at the archives, started with Timothy Leary, found out about this collection, Rosemary Woodruff Leary. I had never heard of her before. And I started looking through her archive, and wow, this is fascinating. And at the same time, it's actually perfect because I can talk about my outfit. Hey. So at the same time, I went shopping at this boutique in Brooklyn, and I saw this dress, and it was covered in black poppies, and it was, absolutely gorgeous and way out of my price range. And I went home that night and Googled it. And this is the same time I'm in the archive. And I Googled it, and it was by this company. Can you pronounce it for me again? Okay, thank you. It's a Swedish company, and that dress and the collection, including this one, which I later bought, was inspired by Rosemary Woodruff Leary.
That's amazing.
So it was one of many signs to come. I had a lot of synchronicities. While she was very much a believer in synchronicities and signs, and that was like my major sign that I really wanted to dive in. So that's thank you for asking.
Thank
that
you
question.
for telling that story. Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. What an absolutely pleasure. Wonderful night.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
And welcome to Book Passage. My name is Jonathan Spencer. I'm the assistant manager here at the store, and I'm also one of the members of the events team. I always like to say before I start one of these events that though I love selling books, my absolute favorite thing to do here is to host events, because not only do I get a chance to meet wonderful new authors and hear what they have to say about their work, but also to meet you and have your questions answered, and also kind of get a chance to get a deep understanding of some of the wonderful new work out there. So it's just as much fun for me as it is for you. This evening, it is my great pleasure to welcome our guest author, Susannah Cahalan, who is joining us to celebrate the publication of her new book, The Acid Queen, The Psychedelic Life and Counterculture Rebellion of Rosemary Woodruff Leary. What the San Francisco Chronicle recently said marks yet another compelling entry in the growing body of work reclaiming the stories of women unfairly relegated to the footnotes of history.
Right.
Susannah will be joining conversation today by Meg Josephson. Other peer and critical reviews have equally wonderful words. They describe The Acid Queen as meticulously reported and beautifully crafted, rich in sumptuous detail, both personal and historic, and a fascinating portrait of an unsung shero of the Counterculture. And whenever I'm doing one of these preparations for a hosting event, I always pick one of the blurbs that has been written by one of their authors who has read it, and this is my favorite for this particular one. Callahan shines a light on one of the 20th century's most amazing untold life stories. Rosemary Woodruff Leary blazed an astonishing trail through the red-hot center of 60s counterculture. The downtown beats, the pioneers of hallucinogens, the summer of love, rock and roll royalty, the Weather Underground, the Black Panthers, and more. With her captivating storytelling, Cahalan helps us all see this wildly misunderstood epic of American life with new eyes. An essential read and an unforgettable trip.
Right.
Susannah Cahalan is a #1 New York Times bestselling author, journalist, and public speaker. Her first book, Brain on Fire, has sold over 1 million copies and has been translated into more than 20 languages. We have a few copies up front. Her second book, which we also have, The Great Pretender, was shortlisted for the Royal Society's 2020 Science Book Prize. She'll be in conversation with Meg Josephson. Meg is the author of the upcoming book, Are You Mad at Me? How to Stop Focusing on What Others Think and Start Living for You. That'll be coming out in August, I apologize. A full-time psychotherapist, she holds a Master of Social Work from Columbia University with a concentration in clinical practice, and received her meditation teacher certification from the Nalanda Institute in New York City. Will you please welcome them both to the stage? We're going to do a little artful switch of microphones here. This one is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to see and meet many of you, or see some people I do know already. I want to say a few words just about Meg. I have a galley of her book, which I was very lucky enough to read and get to offer a few words. And I saw myself in these pages. If anyone here has ever described themselves as a people pleaser, I don't know how many people identify in that way. You will find yourself in this book, and it's a pretty life-affirming and life-changing book. So when it comes out in August, you should all get it, and you should have her here. Yes. Yes. So, and I also just want to acknowledge a few people in the audience who are very special to this project. Chief among them is Gary Woodruff, which is Rosemary's brother.
All right.
Yes. Without him, this book would not be possible. Another person is Denis, who's sitting right here, who has given me so much of her time and generosity and wisdom and beautiful laughter. And I've had such a great time getting to know you. And then there's John, who so much of this would have been mysterious and impossible for me to have done without you, and I can't thank you enough for your the amount of time you spent with me and how much you trusted me with this story. I can never thank you enough. So thank you all again for coming here. I'm excited. I'm gonna, I think, how many people here, I think the answer is pretty clear. How many people know who Timothy Leary is? Oh. Okay, you ask that in different contexts. People don't know him anymore as much. Like if you ask young people, a lot of people don't know. So sometimes when I'm doing a talk, I like to ask that question because I sometimes have to introduce him, or at least clarify who he was. So we don't have to do that here. We already have a shorthand. But how many people know Rosemary Woodruff Leary? Show of hands. Right, okay, so I think I need to give a little introduction to her. So I'm gonna read a little bit, which is fun to do. And let's see, okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So there we go. I'm reading from my preface, and I'm gonna try to do it so you can get bored, but I'm not gonna undermine myself. She is not my formal psychotherapist, but she is my grounding force. And now we we have a new hype up song. She got me help ease my anxiety before this, so we've been through a lot in the past hour together. Okay, so all right. Rosemary Woodruff Leary is everywhere and nowhere. There's a good chance you've seen her face dozens of times without ever registering her existence. In one of the most iconic images of the 20th century, Yoko Ono and John Lennon sing "Give Peace a Chance" in a hotel room bed in flowing white robes, protesting the Vietnam War. If you allow the eye to wander, you will notice, perhaps for the first time, a striking brunette in the foreground. She sits beside the silver-haired Timothy Leary, who smiles wide, clapping, fully consumed by the moment. Unlike her husband, Rosemary stares straight at the camera, at you, the viewer, lips pursed together in a knowing grin, enigmatic and unruffled. She appears to exist outside the scene, commenting on it, an appropriate look for a woman who stood unnoticed on the edge of the world stage. Her name hit the newspapers in 1965, after her first arrest with the fired Harvard psychologist Timothy Leary at the Mexico border. The media didn't know what to do with the 30-year-old, so they dubbed her the Woodruff Woman. When she married Leary in 1967, she became the perfect love to her husband, the former administrative assistant to the media, and earth goddess, nurturing, sensual, and otherworldly to his followers. 2 years later, she remade herself once again into a one-named media heroine, Rosemary, the acid queen, who championed her husband's causes as he languished behind bars. For the sake of her perfect love, she became a fugitive, forced to face the limits of her freedom and her marriage. Fading into obscurity at the end of her life, she served as a footnote, an afterthought, in order to preserve the legacy of her ex-husband, who changed the world with his still infamous slogan, "Turn on, tune in, drop out." Timothy Leary and his supporters have dictated most of what has been written about Rosemary since. The vast majority of takes liken her to a beautiful accessory, an expensive leather bag that completes an outfit. But the contradictions abound. She was more political than her husband, some have argued, driving him insane enough with jealousy to escape prison and land in the arms of revolutionaries. To others, she was a whore who hadn't worn a bra in years, as one recent book alleged, merely the broad in Leary's bed, as a male contemporary described her. As beautiful as she wasn't the brightest star in the sky, another male memoirist wrote. She had two possible parts to play in the Leary saga, advocate or interchangeable woman. As time passed, and fewer people recognized the name Timothy Leary, the world settled on the latter. When Rosemary died in 2002, few people outside the insular psychedelic underground bothered to distinguish her from the four other women in Leary's life. Consequently, Rosemary offers us an unfamiliar kind of hero's journey. She was the perfect hippie who was a generation older than the baby boomers. She was muse and protege, worshiper and defier. While she was ambitious, She chose to sublimate her greatness by shaping a mythology that didn't have room for her in it. She was an escape artist whose primary creation was herself. She was a woman who tasted fame and found it both repulsive and intoxicating, and who desperately wanted to be seen while hiding from even her closest friends. She was a person betrayed who returned to her betrayer, a woman of great integrity who also happened to be a criminal, a fugitive whose bravery helped preserve a key part of American history. Hardly anyone knew, or still knows, the debt owed to the woman behind the so-called psychedelic guru, whom the government viewed as a threat to democracy. Skip ahead a little. Members of the psychedelic movement who know of Rosemary's work behind the scenes call her a pioneer, whose unacknowledged sacrifice helped safeguard an underground movement. Her devotion to psychedelics, despite risk of imprisonment and ostracism, is especially relevant today. A topic that was once verboten is now top of mind for PTSD sufferers, open-minded psychiatrists, and Silicon Valley tech companies that want to patent the experience. To many, psychedelics are medicine, chemicals that can be used to heal or hack the psyche. But Rosemary's perspective, rare in the male-dominated 1960s milieu, illuminates our ongoing attraction to mind-altering chemicals that extends far beyond the clinical. She believed that these substances, which have been in use for thousands of years, provided connection to the great cosmic mysteries. This ineffability calls us, as it did Rosemary, though fully succumbing to that call requires a level of sacrifice. At almost every pivotal point in her biography, Rosemary ran from home, from reality, from her husbands, from the law, from her past. And at each step, she made herself anew. As Rosemary herself said, "I've lived the same type of life as everyone else, just in more exotic places." Whether this is true or not, who among us cannot, at some point in our lives, relate to the driving desire to bury or even destroy the person we once were or are? Rosemary reveals the very human cost of the pursuit of such transcendence. No net will catch us when we choose to leap into the void. That gives like a little taste of who Rosemary was, and also just personally to me, who she was. And thank you for listening.
A moment for the necklace.
Oh, yes. So this is very special. This was given to me for the book tour by Gary and his daughter Kate, and this was Rosemary's necklace, and it was her League for Spiritual Discovery necklace that was kind of like a members only jacket, but in necklace form that everyone got who was in the League for Spiritual Discovery at Millbrook. And they let me wear it, so I feel very proud to be representing this wonderful necklace, and thank you for asking me about it. I'm very excited.
I always liked that the acronym for that was LSD.
Yeah, it seems on the nose.
Feels good.
Yeah. Not subtle.
Yeah,
I would
not
say.
subtle.
No.
I know in the epilogue you talk about your inspiration for writing the book, but you want to start there?
Sure.
What drew you to her story?
Absolutely. So I've always been interested in, not maybe perhaps always, but I have been interested in altered states for a very long time, which started with my own experience with an altered state that lasted several months when I was 24 years old. I wrote a book about it called Brain on Fire, and that experience described my experience with autoimmune encephalitis that causes a kind of state of psychosis, hallucination, delusions. It was an illness that had only been named and discovered 2 years before I was diagnosed. Most people who had what I had would have been either diagnosed with schizophrenia. A lot of people have argued probably, given an exorcism in some cultures. So that experience with stepping into another realm, though not induced by psychedelics, but induced by my own brain chemistry and some kind of strange immune response, really question the state of our reality and how our brains shape our reality. And I've been fascinated with that ever since. My second book dove into diagnosis and psychiatry and the limits of medicine. And I was interested in psychedelics in terms of illuminating how our mind works. And I was talking to a lot of researchers who picked up on the fact that I had written about psychedelics in my 2 previous works. In the first one, in Brain on Fire, I talked about ketamine specifically because it actually acts against the same receptor in the brain that affected my illness. And then in my second book, I talked about Humphrey Osmond, who came up with the term psychedelic, but who used to give LSD to his architect that he would work with when he was creating psychiatric hospitals during a time when people considered LSD to be a psychotomimetic, basically allowing someone to understand the experience of psychosis or madness. So that was really interesting to me, and people had asked me, would you compare the psychotic experience, the psychedelic experience? And that was intriguing, and so I started down a kind of pathway to talking and thinking about psychedelics in that way, and of course, all roads lead to Timothy Leary when you start looking at the psychedelics. And I was, lucky enough to have access to, I was a researcher in residence at the New York Public Library, and I had access to the Timothy Leary archives, and which anyone can have access to it. And I started going into his archives, and then I also became aware of an ancillary collection of the Rosemary Woodruff Leary archives, and I had no idea who she was, and there was no Wikipedia page about her. There's very little online. And I started going into her archives and thought, this is fascinating. She's a fascinating person. There was an unpublished book there. And then I went shopping at an amazing boutique in Brooklyn. And I found this beautiful dress covered in black poppies and was so striking. And I was too expensive, so I didn't buy it. But I did go online and Google it. And it was by this Swedish company called Rhoda Beer. And the collection was based on the experiences of Rosemary Woodruff Leary.
Wow.
Right when I was in her archives the first time. It was an amazing, Rosemary was a big believer in synchronicities. That was like my big sign that I should do something. And so then COVID hit, and we didn't have access to the collection for a while. Gary and I met around that time and started talking. And then I got access to the files, and Gary gave me access to her additional archives that hadn't been seen, and that started me on a 4-year odyssey.
And you had some synchronicities too. You mentioned like an owl.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So around the same time, I was debating about what to do. I ghostwrite as well, so I was thinking about taking on a ghostwriting project. And I'm walking down the street in Brooklyn, and there's a card on the floor, like a greeting card. And it is of an owl. Now, I would later learn that Rosemary identified with the owl because later in her life, she identified with Athena and the idea of the pursuit of knowledge through Athena. So the owl and Rosemary were very closely related. I didn't know it yet. And she also had a dream, a pretty striking dream about Timothy and leaving Timothy that involved an owl clawing out her eyes. So owls really do kind of show up. But again, I didn't know that. But the owl had mushrooms growing out of its head. And this card was pristine. It was like placed there. It wasn't stepped on. I have it still on my writing desk. And it was empty. It was empty inside. It wasn't signed to anyone. I actually had a Ralph Metzner. So do you mind? Kathy was married to the late Ralph Metzner, and I love Ralph. He's my favorite of everyone. And I ordered a book, The Birth of the Psychedelic Culture, and it was signed by Ralph Metzner. I just ordered it on 8 books, and it was signed by him. I drove in Cape Cod. I was driving with my twins. I was trying to get them to sleep in the back. I didn't know Rosemary's addresses yet. And I drove right past her house, out of the thousands of houses on Cape Cod. Same time on Cape Cod, I went to where she worked at the Provincetown Inn, turned on the local radio station, WOMR, where she used to work, and all of a sudden the person's talking about Gibby Haynes, butthole surfers, and going to Timothy Leary's house. It was there were other things like that. It was a tapping into Rosemary, which like wearing her necklace is really the kind of real embodiment of that, but John was so wonderful to give me her mirror, which meant a lot to me. I used her tarot deck. I threw the I Ching every day. I did her yoga. I listened to her music. I really tried to embody, I tried to get inside her head to try to make this as intimate as possible of a biography.
Incredible. Did you feel any internal shifts within yourself during that process?
Absolutely. I mean, this book changed me, in kind of concrete ways, and maybe less so, but when the Brain on Fire era of my career, I had this very difficult experience, and there are things that still can't be explained away by just understanding it through the neurobiological lens, but I tried hard. I wanted to be like, this is explained, I had an autoimmune disease in my brain, I wasn't crazy, and this can all be explained because when you tap into the temporal lobe, you get these kind of images. Like, I really tried to be very concrete and like the materialist kind of rational worldview. I come from tabloid journalism. It's the most so I really wanted to be on the ground, feet on the ground. And then my second book was an education into how much we don't really know in medicine. And we don't know how basic things work. We really don't know how anesthesia really works. Like just things we think we take for granted, we don't really know, and that kind of opened me up. And then Rosemary's World opened me up so much more to being a little bit more comfortable with the unknown and being a little more open to it. And that that has shifted me for sure. Yeah.
Well, I want to say a few words about your book, if I can. I finished it last night and cried multiple occasions, especially the second half of the book. It reads like fiction, and in large part because of her story, and the other large part because of your writing. It's alive on the page, so I'm excited. If you all haven't read it yet, I assume most people probably have. Has anyone read it? Okay, yeah, some people. But I'm excited for you all to read it, and you are just unbelievably talented, so yeah, congratulations. Where do we begin with with Rosemary? There's just so many angles to take.
I know.
Such a story.
Do you want to start, I feel like maybe for people who didn't know her, her context of her times is really important.
Yeah.
She was born in 1935, which you can't forget that when you're thinking about her and how transgressive she was, how bound by the time she was. Both those things are true. And I think, if you don't take into the context the fact that she was born in 1935, you miss a great deal of her real bravery. And so, she was born in St. Louis in 1935, was married by 17, there's openings right here too. Come join us.
Come close.
Mary was Mary's family is in my second book, so.
Yes.
Claudia's here too, Mary's buddy. So, she was very much kind of a product of her time and reacting against it. And married at 17, abusive relationship, fled that. And this is kind of the shift, is fleeing that relationship. Many people stayed in very, very abusive relationships. She did not. And she just got on a train to New York without a degree, without a high school degree, without any notion of what she was going to do with her life. And just forged a path among kind of amazing, the beat movement, but even before that really became a thing. She was a part of the jazz movement in the city. She became a model. And it's amazing what was really gratifying for me. There are many moments kind of outside the Leary mythology, how interesting she was in her own right and how much she did before she met Leary. And it was really important to me to make sure that part was very much explored in this book as well.
Yeah. So that's something that struck me as a theme, is just her ability to start over and begin again at any time. It felt like those were quick intuitive decisions where she would be in that reality and then realize, oh, I can't do this anymore, and then start over. What do you think allowed for that clarity to come through? What do you think she was pulling from?
That's so interesting. I think in some ways she always had a sense of internal greatness, which can border on narcissism.
Yeah.
But she did see herself as a main character in her story, which we all have main character syndrome. All of us have that. Mm-hmm. But she really, not in her story, in the story. She saw herself in historical terms, mythological terms. And she believed in that. And she would constantly write in her diaries, wanting to assert her greatness and wanting to be the main character. I mean, literally using those words. And I think that kind of inner self kind of regard did motivate a lot of that. She also had tools at her disposal, especially when she started experimenting with psychedelics, that coincided with her, exploring the use of the I Ching and the tarot, which I think helped her clarify her mind and helped give her support that sense of importance. She's on a path, which I feel that same way when I threw the I Ching, that there is a path, and that's very, and then listen, you're making your own path too, which we talk about, Kathy, astrology can tell you, give you it's not like written in stars literally that this is what you're gonna do. It's just showing that there are things that can be maybe more positive or more supported by something that might be what you'd call destiny. But that doesn't mean you're going to have that. You necessarily go on that path. And I think that she saw those tools and was undergirded by not only the self-regard, but also these tools that she had kind of found during that time.
And that inner greatness, and yet with Timothy, who is like such a big character and name, how do you think of or just make sense of that balance? Like she had that inner greatness that maybe she was in his shadow to make him so great.
Yeah, this is
This
fascinating, and I think it was repeated in her life. But
Yeah.
there is this Jungian kind of idea of the golden shadow, which I think is profound insight about sometimes with narcissists. Again, I don't want to use these terms in like pejorative way because we all are narcissists, but like when someone who is great but can't express that greatness, they express it through other people. And I think that can be pathologizing care, which I'm really careful. Because she really was very good at caring for someone and supporting. But there also is this sense that, you know, you can have reflected glory by putting your greatness into someone else.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, you know, that goes down to her first husband, who was like the hunk. You know, like a very desirable guy in a small town. Her real way out, I mean, she went to an army base. She got to get out of St. Louis through him. And then it's, you know, her second husband was this jazz accordionist in Manhattan, who was a Holocaust survivor, brilliant, difficult guy, but he was also great and gave her access to this whole new way of thinking and being, and you know, trying drugs and being part of that social system of what it is to be using substances in that way. So it was that was kind of was a pattern that existed before Leary, but obviously Leary took it to a totally different level.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of Julia Cameron and her book The Artist's Way, of like that tendency often being is it's safer. It's safer, you're not risking rejection, you're not needing to be perceived in the same way.
Yes.
You can have the other person be a channel for your greatness and not have to risk the potential consequences of being perceived. Do you feel that there was fear mixed in with that?
Amazing insight. I think that there is. And I think that it was maybe because of the situation she was in. Listen, she was twice divorced by the time she met Leary.
Yeah.
She was a model briefly, but then was a stewardess and got aged out of being a stewardess when she hit 30.
Yeah.
And, you know, you couldn't be over 120 pounds and et cetera. And so what were her prospects out there in the world? What was her life going to look like? It wasn't looking good. And so I think there is it fear? Is it a survival instinct? It's a combination of all those things, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I also in her writing, just this constant unsatisfaction. I noticed this kind of cycle of rejection that would happen of she would want to write, would put herself out there, get rejected, not get a call back, agent would turn it down, the publishing house would turn it down, and then she would burrow back into hiding. Granted, she was in hiding for 24 years.
Yes.
24?
Yeah.
So that fed that need to isolate, but I think there was definitely some protective retreating that was happening.
I totally understand. She had no other choice. No one wanted her story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the rejection letters, as Gary said before, there was very thick, but there's a point at which she's still in hiding, and she's been working on this book, and John was a big part of her starting the book, because he really pushed her to tell her story, and he saw worth in her story, he saw worth in her in general, and she started working in 1972, she started working on the book, and, you know, by the 80s, she was still working on the book. When she died in 2002, she was still working on the book. That book, I mean, dozens and dozens of drafts of that book. She tried and tried and tried. She just kept kind of perseverating over the same thing. She just couldn't get past, you know, she was protecting so many people and protecting herself, as you say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that she had no choice but to retreat because the world did not want to hear from her. And in fact, you know, it's still a battle for a lot of women, especially in this psychedelic world, underground world, to get their voices heard and have people really, I think it's changing considerably for a lot of the work that's being done actually around here. But it's still, you know, it's still hard to get people to really listen to that. And it was fascinating to me in general. There's absolutely zero, except for one book, scholarship on hippie women. Now, you cannot find academic scholarship on a huge segment of the population that shifted the culture dramatically, and the women are a huge reason They were the ones stoking the fires and making the meals and making it all possible. But look for a book about it. There's one, Daughters of the Aquarius, and that's it. That's it. And it's a huge segment of this is undergirds even today our culture. And we don't have, except for if you're Janis Joplin or Stevie Nicks, which they deserve as, many biographies, but you don't get much more outside of that. And this was really important to me to at least attempt to have one story rectify that a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you did that.
Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Even in her, I'm remembering even in the drafts that she had, you talked about she would have exes read it and then needing to then sift through and like, I think you said it was like a veneer.
Yes.
And you need to reverse that. Can you talk about just like the influence of those exes on her own writing?
What's amazing, so everyone had a different take. More Leary, less Leary, like this is your story, this is a bigger story. Everyone had different takes, and Timothy read it and was like, oh, you're too hard on me, essentially, in the book, which, she wasn't. She was very kind to everyone, I think. She was a very kind person. But what the person who really worked hard at removing that veneer was someone who predates me, which was a man named David Phillips, who was Rosemary's very close friend for many years. They met in Cape Cod while she was underground. He gave her a place to live. He supported her when she moved out west. He was, I think, like the most important man in her life. I think at the end of the day. And when she died, her dream was to become an author and a writer. That was what she listed as her occupation when she was arrested, even though she had never written, published. She'd written but not published. She wanted this so badly, and David Phillips spent the last years of his life making that happen, and that resulted in the book that was published called Psychedelic Refugee, which he edited, and he really worked on taking those layers off the veneer and really seeing the mahogany wood underneath and seeing her, getting her voice back. So I owe a great debt to David Phillips. Unfortunately, he's the late David Phillips, I never got to meet him. But in Psychedelic Refugee, which you can all buy, and is a wonderful, it's interesting to compare them, I think, but you can see the kind of parts that are missing, and I think they're really profound, what's missing in Psychedelic Refugee, but also just, it's really fun to be immersed in her writing, because she's a beautiful writer. But David Phillips was the one who really helped her, and he was also the person who really urged her to make the Woodruff story, to really, find her voice. And he was an amazing advocate for her. And the thing about Rosemary is she's had a lot of amazing advocates in her life and continues to have advocates as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm jumping around because we're starting with contextualizing her life. Her last words were, "I understand now." What do you make of that?
So I cried by writing that part. I think
cried
Denis and I
reading it.
cried by talking about that part. I'm gonna cry now, but I mean, we were talking, what does that mean? And so she died young at 66. She didn't have health care when she was on the run. She didn't have any money. I had her tax returns, and I think she made $12,000 a year. She didn't, she had to struggle to get dental care, and that doesn't make, she smoked, and I understand, when you're alone and isolated, smoking is actually like a best friend. And I think that was for her like a crutch, not even just a crutch, a friend, a constant companion. And I think she just couldn't give that up. And 24 years of living under an assumed name. She lived under as Sarah Woodruff in Cape Cod, running a hotel there in Provincetown, edge of the world. And she struggled. I think she was a seeker. She was searching for things. She was searching for community. She was searching for meaning. She was searching for freedom. I mean, she was really a seeker. And I think she did not find what she was looking for until the end. I think, you didn't feel the relief of her passing, I think, right? We talked about this. And maybe it wasn't relief, but I think she found something. Saying, I understand now. I don't know if that means, I'm fulfilled now. But I think to me that means, I don't know, I think that means maybe it all, she doesn't have the anger anymore, she's let go of the regret, maybe she understands why she's here, I don't know, but I love it, and it's moving to me, deeply moving, those final words, and I guess we could all aspire to just understand at the end. That would be amazing, to just be able to say that, and what a gift to the people who loved her. Everyone does wrong. There was a lot of, especially Timothy, was not a great partner, to say the least. But I understand now, it sounds like a release of any of that, and I hope we all get that.
Yeah. Anger feels really important as we go into maybe her relationship with Timothy. In reading some of the snippets of her journal entries, I had a thought of, did she know she was angry?
Oh.
Like, did she let herself be angry and acknowledge that was anger? Or was suppressing and shoving that anger down part of the survival? Because if she were to feel, as she's such an emotional, sensitive, deep feeling person, if she were to acknowledge her anger, what would that mean? Like, what would she be giving up,
I don't know the answer to that. I don't. I'd be curious to hear what people here think about that. She definitely had anger. You can tell in her diaries that she was angry. I think she expresses it. I don't know how often she expressed that anger outwardly. I don't know. And John, I don't know. But it was there, and I think the psychedelic use, for her, was a way to connect deeper to Timothy, but also as it started to go bad, became a way to escape some of those maybe emotions. I don't know. I think it was a conduit to him, and then he, as their relationship, the relationship kind of turned and then actually returned right before their marriage. Yeah. I think that was a way of escaping from some of that feeling. I'm kind of going on all in there. I don't know if she would describe herself. I have a feeling she would not have described herself as angry.
Yeah. Well, to your point too about just women in that time, like, was it even an option? Could you be,
Yeah, that's a great
needing to be soft, but also improve
No, that was her persona,
Yeah.
Her persona is a big part of that. She was the divine feminine. She was, the representative of yin and yang. She was the softness, the light to the dark, and you have to uphold that. And there's no anger there. When you're the goddess, you're not angry. At least that kind of goddess. There's some goddesses. Don't ask Shiva or something. You're not angry, but there are angry goddesses. But the feminine, soft, and that was a big thing for her when she could not get pregnant. Because if she was supposed to be this embodiment of the divine feminine, but the fact that she could not bear children was very hard for her. And the kind of upholding that flower goddess kind of image, the fact that she had a difficulty with that was very painful.
Yeah. I'm remembering too this was after her underground era, if you will, but not wanting to be seen as the goddess anymore, whether it was she was scared to be seen, fatigued by being in the spotlight, or was it that she primarily enjoyed the spotlight when she was in it with Timothy? But can you talk about sort of like her evolution of wanting to be seen as that feminine figure, and like when was it just for her?
It's so interesting. So she loved Edith Hamilton's mythology, which is like a feminist retelling of it's a wonderful book. And she would say, I'm past my Aphrodite flowering phase. I'm in my Athena kind of warrior goddess phase, a goddess of wisdom. She would do what we talked yesterday about the kind of three sides of a woman, kind of the maiden, the virgin, the beauty, whatever, Aphrodite, and then the crone. And she would gladly say that she was in the crone stage. And it is during that time in Cape Cod where she really did do it for herself, and that's when she describes herself as in that crone stage. And she describes in an interview about the process of like letting that sensual, sexual, big part of her power, but letting it go was very empowering in some ways. It was also like hard, difficult, painful, but I think she talks about knitting her life back together during that time on the Cape when she was entering that stage. And I think any woman who is, going through that process knows that there is nostalgia, there is sadness, but there's also freedom there as well, to not be so seen in that way, to not constantly be aware of your body and I think that there's something very freeing there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
there's an interesting thing that happened in Cape Cod that was described by several people in Cape Cod, was that she became invisible. And I think a lot of women have felt that way during a certain age, but there was something in there that also was wonderful to be invisible too. It was painful and wonderful at the same time.
Was it Sarah, was that the name of the infant that had died? What was
that? Sylvia.
Sylvia.
Yes.
That really struck me. Sylvia was a name that she took on, and it was from a birth certificate of a child that had a baby that had passed away, and meanwhile she was not able to get pregnant and going through her own infertility struggle.
And that's essentially when she's erased, because
Yes.
that's when she helps break Timothy Leary out of prison, picks this life of being underground, being a fugitive, and essentially erases herself. So she takes on this name of this thing that she wanted but couldn't have. I mean, it's very poetic, really, and very painful to even think about what that must have been like. And she was very much aware of that.
Yeah, and just so much life and death, so many life and death cycles happening within all the lives that she lived.
Yes.
Constant.
Yeah, death and rebirth is definitely,
Yeah.
that's part of the psychedelic experience, and ego death, and there's that too. Like, what does ego death look like for a woman who's not seen in the same way? Like, what does it look like for a man who's very much seen? Like, that looks different.
Yeah. How do you differentiate those?
I mean, it's hard to even, I think it's very individual, but I think that for someone who already struggles with their place and asserting their power, the concept of ego death can be, it's kind of the concept of being invisible again. There's freedom there, but there's also a loss as well. So I think it can be both empowering and also very destabilizing too.
Mm-hmm. You talk in the book about spiritual narcissism and both Timothy and Rosemary experiencing sort of this inflated ego at one point, I think together.
Yes.
Can you just talk more about that?
They would become mythological figures, and Jesus and Mary, and very much kind of wanting to spread the word about psychedelics, democratizing psychedelics, while also feeling like they were the messiahs, but they were the ones with the information.
Yeah.
And everyone else was kind of seen as, and that, Rosemary describes that, and she was very uncomfortable actually, like looking back at least at that, and she would, at the time, she would actually express to Timothy that she felt very uncomfortable with this kind of wide dissemination of psychedelic use, especially when it was connected in that Playboy, the very, very famous Playboy article, where it's very much connected with sex.
Yeah.
And she felt really conflicted about that. Actually, not even conflicted. She didn't feel good about that.
Mm-hmm.
She said she likened it. She was a big science fiction fan, and she likened it to Frodo with the ring. And she felt she didn't want that much power. She said something about the responsibility. She didn't want the responsibility of turning people on, because she knew that there's light and shadow. It's not just light. And I think that she was very much more responsible than Timothy was with that.
Yeah. Well, it's also with the sex piece, like the woman still being responsible for the man and his urges or his desires, and still needing to take care. She's still taking care of people, even in not being responsible.
Well, it's really interesting that I have her trip reports, and there was one where she's really, getting very navel gazing, writing all this, it's really fun to read them, but she's talking about actually a death urge of hers, like a suicidal kind of thing, and it's very dark and deep and intimate. And then she starts writing out a recipe that she's going to do that, make Timothy a dinner that night. So it was never far, this taking care, this domestic side, which is part of the set and setting thing that she was so good at and really contributed to.
Yeah.
But that was never, caring for others was never far from her mind. And it's been interesting, it's generationally interesting about how people view this, because some people, I was talking to someone who's a psychedelic dude and very much in the world, and he was like, well, that's a very gendered thing, set and setting, or, and I thought, well, is it bad that she's good at what's traditionally seen as a feminine thing? Is that inherently bad?
Yeah.
No, she'd actually loved to cook, and she actually loved to take care of people. Why are we denigrating that?
Yeah.
And I think that is a shame.
Right. is feminism not just the right to choose?
Right,
and-
exactly, just, she described,
Yeah.
she wanted to be kind of associated with this typical, traditional femininity.
Yeah.
That's not inherently bad, if that's what she
Absolutely.
wanted to do, which is what she did wanna do in large
Yeah.
part.
Yeah, we were talking about the elements of feminism of, that we celebrate tend to be more masculine.
Yes.
Being a boss, energetically, I don't mean gender-wise, just energetically, and we are quick to celebrate women, as we should, but why is that contrasting the softer, more nurturing side that we all need?
It's just not valued in our culture.
Yeah,
Care is
absolutely.
not valued in our culture,
Yeah,
and we see
yeah.
that, and it's reflected in some of the ways I've seen some readers talk about Rosemary.
Yeah,
Talk about her value or worth. And it's really illuminating about the person themselves, but about society's view of people who care for others,
yeah,
which is not to value that very highly,
yeah,
which I think is a shame.
absolutely. How do you feel Timothy did or didn't influence her perception of her own femininity?
I think he made her feel very feminine. I think he definitely did. And I think, it was in a way, I don't wanna say cartoonish, but it was very binary in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think he did very much pull that out of her, and she pulled it out of him too, and that they really did merge. There were points in which their love affair, which was not perfect and twisted at times, there were moments of true merging
Yeah.
and like true profound connection. And some of that was about pulling greatness from each other.
Yeah.
That's why it was so fun to read. It was the most fun I've spent writing anything. And I just don't wanna leave it. I'm like, can I write another book about Rosemary? Because I love her so much, but.
Do you wanna talk more about your process of
Sure.
writing it?
I'd love to talk about that. I love talking about process. So, this was 2020 when I first did the dress in the archives, and I went through some of the archives. COVID happens. I connect with Gary and his daughter Kate, and we went back and forth a lot. Gary has had a lot of people trying to tell Rosemary's story, coming in, flitting in and out, really wanting to tell Timothy's story, really not really dedicated to it, and I think he was maybe wary of me at first, but we talked for. Why am I speaking for you? You're right here. You can talk. What was the process initially like in there?
When Rosemary passed, first off, I should say real quickly that she was 13 years.
It's helpful, thanks.
Thank you. She was 13. I was 4 years old when she moved out of the house. Okay, she was run out of the house by my grandmother and my mom. And when she came back after her first divorce, she wasn't accepted back in. What did you do wrong? Okay, so my sister left and she stayed out there surviving. Looking at her choices when I was a child and a teenager, they seemed really, really weird and kind of off the charts. As an adult and reading the book and understanding more, she was sort of a survivor, and she was doing what she had to do to be who she was. But Suzanne reached out to me. I had a lot of people reach out to me. My best story is somebody wanted to get me a deal with Netflix, and not the best story, but wanted to get me a deal with Netflix and push this thing. It was going to be a mini-series, and we were going to get the archives and the letters. And the woman came back about a month later and said, what happened to Netflix? She said, well, Netflix has a bunch of Tim Leary's stuff on option. So again, my sister was screwed by Tim Leary. And, so Suzanne and I had a lot of talks, and I have to say that I read both of her books, and The Great Pretender really reached home to me, because she said that it didn't go the way she thought it would go. It didn't have the ending that she had planned, and she had to go a different direction. And she offered up the family for me to call and say hi to them. And I wanted somebody who was going to tell her story. I didn't want somebody who was going, and we had a number of conversations. I researched her, go where you're going to go, find what you're going to find. I didn't realize it would be so intense. And write the real story.
Poor Gary, I did bother you a lot.
Huh?
I did bother you a lot over the past 4 years, not as much as I bothered John,
Yeah,
but
but
I
I'll
did
tell you a
bother,
lot.
and I bothered Denis quite a bit too.
Yeah, but she was open to come and meet people, give her names, and then she talked to people. It was interesting because when she was going through the archives, which I have never seen yet, we're going out to New York to see them, she sent me a letter, or she sent my daughter a letter. Here's a note from Katie and Roe, things I had never seen. And, you know, I have to say right now, Denis and David Phillips, as much as me giving the archives or selling the donating the archives to the New York Public Library, they were the emphasis for it. They really believed that Rosemary's archives should not be wound into Tim's archives. And this young lady up here on the stage who wrote this book has done more for my understanding of my sister. And I have some great mentors with Rosemary, but she put it into a form that was readable. And my granddaughter has read the book already, and she's only 15. My daughter made the decision, and she's helping a legacy that I think needs to be addressed. And a situation that I was very upset when, about 3 years ago when I Googled my sister, and she was a footnote in Tim's Wikipedia. They had dropped her off Wikipedia. And so this to me is a wonderful thing. It's a start for this, and it's gonna, my sister, as you said, wanted to be an author. There's now 3 books on Amazon. Sorry about Amazon, but there are 3 books, and that she's given credit for, and are about her. And to me, I wish I could beam them up to her and say, hey, look at this. So.
Well, in terms of, I think the big thing that he just mentioned was the archives and how that was possible. And I just want to say a little bit about Denis and her role in that. Because the archives, the New York Public Library's interest in the archives starts with their interest in Timothy Leary's archives, which seems obvious now. But Denis, if you want to talk a little bit about the Odyssey, if you don't mind. You don't have to, if you don't want to, you can tell me no.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah. So Denis was responsible for placing them in the New York Public Library, and would you want to talk a little bit about the road that led there?
Yeah, oh.
Please, please, everybody.
Sure. Well, Tim's archives were around for many, many years, and, you know, when he was on a run, they would be in people's garages or, mainly that. So many of them were lost along the way, but most of them were kept intact, and particularly the work at Harvard, because they had offices there and everything was filed. And so the estate had over 400 banker boxes of material, and 25 years of trying to pay the rent on storage for that was an odyssey, and looking for an institution, which was Tim's dream, that would take these, and able to find an agent in New York who approached the New York Public Library. He told them there were 200 boxes, and when they came out and found almost 500, they were pretty overwhelmed. But yeah, it was quite the odyssey, and the fact that they were purchased by the New York Public Library for almost $1 million gives such credibility to the story, because while they were Tim's archives, they were really the history of the psychedelic movement. So it's and one of their most popular research archives there even today. So.
And that opened up, without that, we would never have had Rosemary's archives there too. So, and then Denis and David Phillips were instrumental in getting those placed as well in 2016, a few years after Leary's archives were placed. And I have the emails with the curator, and they were very adamant that it not be subsumed into Timothy Leary's. It was its own collection. And I think he said something to the effect of, if it were to go in his archives, she would be erased again. So it was, it's amazing, and anyone here who goes to the New York Public Library can request to see any of Timothy's files, which they're open to the public, or Rosemary's. So, and I suggest you do, because it's such a trip. I kept being like, if I touch this paper, what will happen? Nothing happened.
Do you want to take a few questions?
Yeah, that would be great.
If anybody has a question, just raise your hand. We'll pass the microphone around, and we can answer a few thoughts anybody has had, or lingering questions you've been always wanting. Here, hang on.
I'm going to ask a stupid one. My husband couldn't come tonight.
I swam in the bay with Gary the other day, and I thought of Ward.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, he wants to know, why did she go to Outdoors?
You know, Denis Yes, why did you go to Aptos? Why Aptos? Just, you were there, right? You had been there, or do you guys go together?
We found out, she was working in Half Moon Bay running a bed and breakfast there, and very tired. And I was looking for a house to rent in Santa Cruz, and so our deal was, if I found a house big enough for two, she was spending her off days at David Phillips' house, but there was a little bit of mold there. And so the deal was, if I found a house big enough for two, she would come and stay with me on her days off. And if I took a smaller place, then she would stay where she was. So we found a great place in Aptos. Unbeknownst to us, there was mold there too. But we had a great house there, big house, perfect party house. We had so many parties. Really
We
had a
went
good
there
time
together,
in
right?
Aptos.
Didn't we go and knock on the door and it was very uncomfortable?
Yeah, he wouldn't let you in.
He was very strange.
Right.
I feel bad for the house because a very strange man is living in it now.
Right.
But that was another synchronicity because Aptos, I was connected to The Great Pretender, and I went out there and I hung out with Claudia and her husband Ward and loved it. I was like, oh, this is amazing. How do I come back here? And then the book brought me back to it. So it's pretty cool.
Anybody else have any thoughts they wanted to add? Got time for maybe one or two more questions. Here you go.
Hello, President.
Oh my gosh! Wow, hello. Are you wearing you know what? I should have known just from your suit. How wonderful to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
So I do have a question. Having had experiences myself when I was younger, they were more during the time period of the 70s, it was more of a recreational kind of a fantasy experience rather than the deliberate experience that I saw, and the one that seems to be shifting to now as they start to use microdosing.
Yeah.
But that transition that you wrote about in the book, in essence, where it became popularist rather than it became something that was studious.
Yes, yeah.
And I was just curious, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want, I won't tell your father.
Yeah.
But
He's been done enough.
I know the subject matter
Yes.
very well.
Yes.
And I don't know if it was challenging to write a book about the subject matter without necessarily, and how you gain an understanding of the full experience, because I had it go from beauty to dark.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
stopped doing mushrooms when my girlfriend died in my arms.
Oh my gosh.
And I had a dream that she died in my arms.
Wow.
And I resuscitated her and took her to the hospital in Boston. And it was at that point I saw a friend of mine who was kind of shamanistic, and he goes, "Chris, these are spiritual tools.
Definitely.
And you were using them for recreation, and the spirit is telling you stop fucking around."
Oh my gosh,
But
that's amazing.
were you able to get the insight into the experience?
Amazing. Okay, so there's amazing, another Jung quote about the tools of the god. You know, the tools of the gods, they have a price, essentially. And I think that's amazing. In terms of my studiousness with this book, I have a history of psychosis. And I had thought very deeply, do I want to go on a heroic journey here and do this? And I had talked to a lot of people who were in this space, and people who were neuroscientists, my own doctor. But the person who crystallized it for me was a woman named Maria Mangini, who was very helpful to me. She's she's a midwife, but she's also has been in the underground. She's, I think Denis called her the psychedelic breast, but I didn't put that in the book. But she's amazing and she's very insightful and like the dream guide that anyone could have. And I asked her, and she said, taking psychedelics is like leaning in for a kiss. If you have to ask, you shouldn't do it. And I still had questions myself about, did I want to take this risk? I have 3 children. At the time when I was really thinking about going on an ayahuasca journey, I had twins who were 3 years old and depend on me in many ways. And I thought, listen, the risk reward for that for me is too steep, at least right now. Now, I've had experiences in the past before I was sick, when I was a teenager. So I know a little bit. And also I feel like stepping foot into another realm can take many different shapes. You can do it through breathing exercises, you can do it through meditation. There's not one way to get there. I think there's Stan Groff had the idea of being a telephone, you either get the call. There's many ways to get that call. And I think that my psychotic experience was my call. I saw things that happened too. I saw myself on TV in a way that was a premonition. And I've had experiences completely sober that have that shamanistic quality. And I think there's many ways of reaching over, and there are dangers any way you slice it in doing that. So I decided that it wasn't a risk worth taking for this book, but I did heavily consider it.
Okay, I think we've reached the point where we
Can I
want
have,
to.
John,
We have one more?
close us out with some nuggets of wisdom, if you can.
Jeez.
If you can.
Nuggets.
John has been my wise journeyman through this. So would you close out our day today with a few
Well,
words?
thank you so much. You know, I think anyone can hear me.
I can certainly.
Right.
He's a trained actor. He knows how to do it.
Go for it.
And thank you so much. And the same kind of impression that Gary got, I got too when I first started speaking with Suzanne. And what's really was important and why I felt that she was right for it was this wonderful tool that she has as an investigative reporter. And don't overlook what that does to someone who can dig into a story. And I really appreciated how much you did that in the other books, and felt that that this was the right time. The entire period that we've lived through, and from the executive gray, I see there's a bunch that did live through those periods and successive periods. We're going through a period right now, which is the end of the patriarchal age. And there are many cycles, but there's this 1-3 cycle that seems to really influence culture, belief, and what people do. And these 3 cycles are about 4,000 years. And we remember the matriarchal cycle because of the tales of the Amazon warriors and Lestrastrada, where the power of the feminine, but then there's these transitions that happen that take centuries to happen, but they're definite. And the biggest indication, if you want to see an understanding of this, is just look to the books of Deuteronomy, the Old Testament, which the Old Testament was the first liturgy really of the patriarchal age, which was God our Father, the One. And God created heaven and earth in one chapter of about, 700 paragraphs. Yet Deuteronomy in the Numbers is hundreds of pages. And when you get into it, because Rosemary and I did, we went back into time to find how to move forward, because everything was dissolved around us. You know, Tim was arrested again, turned state's evidence. There was an enormous amount of federal, international policing looking, but we formed a homunculi and we explored these things. And this move of the patriarchal age is all encompassing, and it takes over subconscious, conscious, and what went on. And the fact that we're moving out of it now, we're moving into the ever-coming child. And why something like this is so important, and every story of value that gives guidance to the feminine consciousness, thus it influenced the masculine consciousness, is very important now. Because we're transitioning into a period and of a major cultural, psychic, energy transition into the ever-coming child. Now, just to give you an idea of what the patriarchal age thought of this moment that's coming up, you can find it in the Apocalypse of John. That's basically what the Christian patriarchal consciousness felt was going to happen when we have to change out of God our Father into some unknown. And why I support Susannah and what she's doing is because it's very important now, especially in this time, to start to gather more vessels of feminine power and understanding and wisdom, not to take over, but so that the child that's coming doesn't only hear stories of the masculine, and thus will have to go through a long period of masculine sterilization of consciousness before we can see what this other embodiment is. And I know that Rosemary, she understood that. You mentioned something about anger. It's interesting. Other people looking in at what was happening would say, my God, there's such a strong reason for anger. I mean, you've been sent to the wolves, you know, but I don't ever remember Rosemary being angry. If anything, she was disappointed that she wasn't able to figure out a way to alter it, you know. But I don't see that anger. And what I do see is, it's a wonderful thing that she always would quote, because the quote would connect her to the guide that got her to the place she was. And one of the most interesting quotes that she had was, she said, I learned that women could be intelligent from Nancy Drew. But that's the truth. When we decided to jump off to Afghanistan, because just what are you going to do? You know, you're on the run, you're doing this. We had bunches of passports, so we could dissolve and coagulate and be different people. I remember that the journey to Afghanistan reinforced her understanding of the significant power of the feminine. And that's why I don't think anger was really a part. You know, that was too easy. Just to be angry, oh, of course you'd be angry, son of a bitch. Gosh, darn it. There's no chance for any normal life for the next 20 years, because everybody's looking for you. Not the right people, you know.
As you can
Just
see, I had a
another
lot of
guy.
fun the last 4 years.
Yes.
I mean, we had a lot of conversations like this, so it was a wonderful time. So, thank you.
That's why I'm just so pleased and happy, and I hope you all enjoy the story.
Yeah.
Because it's a
Thank
nice
you.
story.
Thank you, John. Okay, well, I think that's it for today.
Yeah, well, not quite, because we're gonna get you to meet your public with pen in hand.
Yes,
in a minute
I will
here,
sign
so-
any books you have. I'd be
So,
honored.
first off, let's give them a round of applause and thank them so much.